Hi, sorry folks, I didn't mean to have that happen. My touch screen is having a moment. So I'm seeing that people can hear me. Are you all still able to? Excellent. All right, I'm seeing 1023 that people can hear me. So the key is that I'm going to start sharing my screen again, and let's hope that my my screen doesn't mess with me. It's been a morning. We also had a construction with a jackhammer next to my wall, so this has been a fun start to the day. Okay, so we're back on track. Can everyone see my screen? I'm hoping so. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Thank you everyone for letting me know what you are and aren't seeing. All right, so where we were was the data is imperfect. You can identify where your data health issues are, and then you need to go into how are you fixing these gaps. The passive constituent side is all about where you can get data without the constituent actively providing it to you. As I mentioned before, a lot of times when they're going through life changes and their data is changing, top of mind is not going to be updating their alma mater. So there are ways to be able to update your information, or their information rather. The other way is through actively asking your constituents. And this is really engaging with constituents through your touch points with them already. So previously when you were having events, if you were asking them to RSVP, you could perhaps have been asking for their current email address and contact information. Other touch points are things like class notes, reunions, donations, what have you, but there are ways to continue to try and maintain your data health. So again, mindful of COVID and this next month being the end of the fiscal year, if you don't feel like you have time now, you can do this at a future date. But what you should consider is what approaches can you take to mitigate your data health and enhance it, and what are you willing to pay and potentially put time and effort into. So what that costs, both time and money, to get the output that you require. So this could be how much are you willing to pay, or how much work are you willing to put in if you get 100 more emails that are accurate so you can correctly communicate with a new 100 constituents of your base. This next exercise is all about improving your processes. This is where you are really trying to look at your touch points with your constituents and update your current processes to ensure that it's data-driven and that you're obtaining the accurate data to be able to best communicate and engage with your constituent base. What I've captured here are the biannual and annual confirmed data. This section is all about understanding that as data changes, you want people to update you. So you might have to do an active ask for people to confirm or change the data you have on file. The other section is all around as constituents change their segmentation with you. When a student becomes an alumni, when parents become parents of alumni, or as constituents change their life journey from a young alumni to maybe a loyal donor in the future, their interactions with you change and their expectations in relationship with you change. So having a process in mind is valuable. Same with just general projects and campaigns you have. For each of the initiatives that you are having outward touch points with your constituents, you should be really thinking through your data input and output. What are you bringing in and using to contact and communicate and personalize and segment with your constituent base? What's the output, and how are you actively managing and updating the data you do have? The last is the donations process. You're going to have various processes, those that are for capital campaigns annual giving, one-off random contributions. For each of those, you need to think about from the start what the experience is from the constituent, and see it all the way through past the actual act of giving and beyond into how are you then moving this person from maybe just a single contributor to now a regular donation contributor and changing their segmentation with you. Before my computer went into its hectic mode, I was going to ask for a quick break just so that I give you all time to write down those ideas you have to address your needs, or jot down questions you might want to ask me now or later. And then also, I understand that you are managing both work, at-home life, a lot of questions. If you need to just take a second to write down your thoughts and capture them so you don't forget after this session, please do so. Excellent. Just going to give you one more second. And we will start in just a little bit. I just want to make sure you all have a second to collect your thoughts. All right. We have reached the 10:30 mark, and as I talked through all of these processes that you want to work through, this next section is really going to be focused on the processes we have, or you have rather, and trying to identify how you can improve them. We've talked through the data you have, the inputs and outputs you're using in your goals, and how you categorize them. Now it's all about how do you use this data effectively in what you're doing in your day-to-day. To start, you probably have an understanding of your touch points with constituents throughout the year. I dropped just a select few into a 12-month view right here. This is obviously missing a whole bunch, and you as a school have unique touch points that I cannot capture. But I wanted to give you a visual that there is an ebb and flow of your touch points with constituents, just like there will be an ebb and flow of the data gaps you have throughout the year. What you have to think through is as you develop your touchpoint map, whether you have that written out or in your head, you need to understand that for each of these touch points, this is an opportunity to increase your data health, as well as use the data inputs to more personalize and segment your contact with your constituent base to reach your goals. So some examples here are with the new alumni welcome, that personalization. As we mentioned before, bringing young donors and young alumni in from the start is really powerful because it's maintaining a long-term relationship with them down the line. So personalizing your communication so that they understand how the relationship with the school has been so meaningful these last few years is really important. Same with reunions. You're going to segment people differently. It starts off by class years, which is pretty obvious, but then you even segment further. You're likely communicating differently with those long-term loyal donors. They might be invited to a happy hour and gathering with the head of school. And then there's mini reunions of sports affiliations and what have you. So you're using data already, whether you know it or not. The key is to enhance and really punch up that data usage to make it more personalized, more segmented, and more engaging, and at the same time, being able to maintain your data and use these touch points to update your data so future projects, future touch points are all that more meaningful. I highlighted June here because I know that's where you are. So what I'm going to suggest you do is really focus on this last month and list out the touch points you have with your constituents. And when we talk through this process enhancement, start with those touch points as trying to improve them down the line, and then you can work on process enhancement for the rest of the year after you have a breather with the year end being over. You can see here with the bottom line about this is a visual of 12 months. You should probably also think about this from a constituent journey visual as well. What are the touch points you have with graduating seniors to those that are young alumni moving into their midlife to long-term relationships, what you need to think through is that some of these constituents might become parents of students. Others might fall off your recognition and engagement and then come back when they've moved back to your area. So you have to think through the constituent journey as well and all of the touch points you have with them along their journey beyond just the 12 months. This will be useful, again, when you think about data changing. That contact data changes along a constituent journey. The engagement, that segmentation data might change just within a single year. So I'm going to take an easy touch point that is going to be pretty universal to people. If you are collecting class notes, the current process for some schools might be having your team mobilize class officers, or you yourself might be sending out requests to various class years to provide class notes. So if you're working with volunteers, you might provide them a list of emails of their classmates to reach out to their peers, and those class officers will email out to the class. The class officer receives notes, photos, what have you, but they also might be receiving email bounces, or this volunteer might be using another contact point they have with a classmate because of their personal relationship with them that you're not aware of. So when you actually receive the class notes and compile them and publish and distribute to constituents, all you have from the input standpoint is the data input you started with the entire process. You have no new data. You are missing out on an opportunity for constituents who are engaging with the class officer to confirm their information, update you on where they are, and you're unaware of where the data issues and delivery stand. So one option is to try and merge your class note collection with confirm your data. The two visuals you see here are some mail merge sample emails we have on our Wavelength platform, but bottom line, the concept is combine them. This is empowering class officers to ask for class notes, while at the same time asking their peers to confirm their data. This is powerful because users are more likely to update information if they see it is incorrect. So if you're going to say, hi, Katie, please send in any updates you may have on your life. We want to share them with your classmates. Oh, by the way, do you have any life changes? Update us on your information. I might not remember if you have learned about my recent move to San Francisco. Or, however, if I see that you have listed an old address of mine before my move, I might be more willing to update information. So the two opportunities there are you're collecting class notes with a touch point you already have. This is a behavior users are used to. Plus, you are asking for additional information, and that additional information isn't too much of an ask because it gives constituents a reason of why they're updating you because you're keeping them informed on their classmates. And it's also showing them that you do have data on them and want to make sure it's up to date and accurate. This is what we have. Is it correct or not? The key is to make it really, really simple for people to update you. So either have a link that gives them a sheet to be able to quickly update, or be able to have them respond directly to the email. So what it ends up looking, the new process is the same as the original, except you're adding in an additional confirm your data. The class officers are also going to be probably receiving maybe some updated contact information, or being empowered to inform you as a team with some of these data changes as well. The key to this is really informing and empowering your volunteers if they are the ones that are asking for class notes, and understanding why you're doing what you're doing. Really sharing the knowledge to the volunteers, saying, we want to support and communicate with our constituents to the best of our ability. We understand that everyone is changing locations and living their lives, that they haven't had the opportunity to update us on their changes. So we are combining the two to really move forward and try and clean up the data and make sure that we're as informed as possible. Most class officers and volunteers will understand from a data security standpoint, there are systems like Wavelength and what have you that would reduce the amount of information that you're giving volunteers if you are worried about sending them too much information on users. So if you do combine class notes with a confirm your data, you're able to you're going to have better contact data for future constituent touchpoints, and you'll have identified data health issues, those email bounces or engagement changes. So when you're trying to actually develop a process, what you want to do is really capture the current process you have. What tasks should be completed? You want to write down everything to the minuscule detail because you want this to be kind of a living document to be able to refer to or pass along to as maybe you grow your team or responsibilities change. But you want to make sure that you have what tasks are completed and by when they should be completed. Give a timeline, as well as a list of systems and tools. And lastly, collecting and maintaining the historic files that you've used in the past. It's a helpful reference to see what you've done in the past so you're not having to repeat your work. So what you want to do is kind of really collect all that you have for your current process and then identify areas of improvement. This is thinking about what are the inputs and outputs of the process. Is there any work that I can do to make this process more impactful? Maybe you're doing an email campaign. Can you personalize it with that one extra data point to make it all that more meaningful to a user? I'm going to give an example of sending out newsletters. When you're thinking about sending out a newsletter to everyone, you have to think about how broad your constituent base is. So what's helpful to think about is from an article perspective and what news you have within your newsletter, think through how meaningful each of your articles are to your constituent base. Does each article address maybe an emotional need or value of your personas? Again, going back to that segmentation and persona conversation, what you really want to understand is being customer first and making sure that this is relevant information to them. So from a newsletter perspective, trying to reflect and see the so what behind the articles and making sure that if you are sending out a broad email to absolutely everyone with that newsletter information, do you have relevant data or do you have relevant stories rather that are impactful to each of the people you're communicating with? And if not, do you consider adding or changing the angle of a story to make sure that it seems more relevant to maybe some segmented groups that or constituents that you haven't really targeted at this time? You then want to think about what tools you can use to increase your outreach. As I mentioned, that personalization and segmentation, how can you expand your reach? How can you engage further? But you also want to think through your contact data. Back to the data health, what you're able to identify is what's the health of my email versus my direct mail versus my phone, and thinking through what's missing, who has what preferential channels. So you're likely going to have some pushback of young alumni getting calls because it's pretty unusual to be taking phone calls right now. So for young alumni, maybe they're preferring social posts and emails to some older generations. So really looking at your contact data to try and punch up your process and say, do I have to have a slightly different approach depending on who I'm communicating with? And then lastly, is there anything that I can capture during this touch point that I am not already? You don't want to create too much work for yourself. You don't want to collect too much data that is irrelevant, but you do want to take advantage of a touch point you already have. Creating too many touch points with a constituent might be overwhelming and reduce their want of communication with you. And instead trying to take advantage of touch points you already have would be really useful. So after you've identified those areas of improvement, then you need to design a new process. There are so many different ways to design a process map. I am Lean Six Sigma certified. That's all process improvement. I really just urge you to focus on what visualization you need that feels good for you, because some process maps get a little scary. Bottom line, as we talked through before, what you want to make sure you have is the functions captured as well as that data. So make sure you have some guidelines in your process on how you're storing and updating data with ownership. And you want to make sure that you're really addressing all the inputs and outputs, who's being impacted. If we go back to the class notes feature and process, what you can identify are several different stakeholders who are impacted through that process. I mentioned two in that high-level process map, which was the volunteer class officer and the advancement team. And I didn't show a visual of the constituent being impacted, but you also want to think through the marketing team, if they're separate and developing the actual journal or magazine the class notes are going into. You also want to capture, maybe you have a data management individual. If you think through all of that, you have all of these moving pieces, all of these different individuals working on their own jobs or are impacted in their life by this individual process. You want to make sure it's as clean as possible. So having a little map of where everything's going and what the touch points are of just a single process is also really valuable. Some key process watch outs that I see is that there's sometimes a lack of ownership. So you'll have a tasks listed out, but you won't have a clear owner. If you have a team and you're all working on something together, it's really important to make sure that there is someone who's held responsible for really overseeing the function. This is made even more necessary as things are remote and you can't just pop by someone's desk to make sure something's been completed. Unclear timelines are also something that process maps sometimes have, where you're really not, where you have maybe a goal in your head of, you know, by next Friday I want to have this done. But what you really should be thinking through is how many like business days there are, because by next Friday it sounds like that's, you know, a good long ways away. But if you work it into your brain of how many business days there are and really look at your current day-to-day and how you might not be able to do full days right now because you're managing children at home or you're also supporting other school initiatives and you're not doing 100% on your day job, you really want to make sure timelines are there. The lack of follow-through with processes is also there, where process maps or processes that I see sometimes end too early or start too late. And by that, I mean, if you think about the donation history and, donation process, what you need to think about is donation history of individuals. You're not going to just be sending out an email to all constituents without also knowing of your constituent base who's already given. You're going to probably communicate with young alumni asking for participation differently than you have with elder generations who have been doing some major gift donations. So you need to think the pre-process point of what data do you have and how are you going to be targeting people differently. So the follow through after donations have come in and go into the thank you part, as well as what does that impact mean for these donors for maybe a future gala or reunions, or how are they being changed in future segments because of a current action they take in this process. So you want to see that end-to-end process and really see that journey past the process itself. I've mentioned a lot of things that you want to capture, but I also caution against complexity. You don't want to be too complex. You want to keep it simple. If you bring in too many cooks in the kitchen, if you bring in too many steps, it's really going to get convoluted and it's going to have redundancies and honestly take up a lot of your time. Especially with this next month in mind, what you want to do is keep it simple. So what you really need to focus on and what you might have to do is have that list of all of the tasks that need to be done to finish, reaching those goals, and do a prioritization of this must get done or else I won't be able to reach my goals. And the other ones being some nice to have of if I have the time, this would be really useful, but I might have to get to it later. Being a little bit forgiving of yourself and not being able to do it all is really valuable at this time. So when you're designing that data-driven process, remember that you always want to review the deliverables and the success. Make the changes for next time, really write down your learnings, the opportunities for change, you don't forget. You live such busy lives that if you don't capture it now after the process has just been completed or even during, you're gonna forget when the next year comes around and you're re-picking up this process that happened 12 months ago. You want to be customer first. Make the process easy for the constituent. I mentioned before on some of the data we have on online giving. Things that I saw with that online research and online giving behaviors is the amount of people who drop their activity as they're trying to donate online because of the difficulty it is to actually reach the final giving page and searching for it. So what you really want to think through is put yourself in the shoes of the customer and your constituent and really identify how easy is it for them to update you on information, how easy is it for them to give, how easy is it for them to understand how much you know about them and how much you want to personally engage with them. And then lastly, don't lose the data. Data is obviously the purpose of this entire call, but you want to make sure that you update all of your systems and platforms with the data you have before, during, after, and you need to have someone tasked with being in charge of it. Very easy, especially if you're more than one person, to forget to update the data or try and get to it later. And the longer you take a step away from it, the harder it is to remember all the learnings, especially if it's not all quantitative data when you're doing updates. As I've mentioned before, there's a lot you can track. And what you really want to focus on to make sure that you're tracking the right data is this going to help you reach your goals in the future? Can it improve your future projects? And 3, will it grow your constituent knowledge to let you segment, personalize, and contact them more? If it doesn't fit into one of those 3 buckets, it might be a nice to have rather than a need to have. And in a time where you probably need to prioritize what you can and cannot do, make sure the data that you are tracking and using fit into these 3 buckets. So now you're at a stage of needing to finish out the year. You, from a short-term perspective, probably should just focus on prioritizing the processes that you need to finish out those touch points for the next month. You want to consider where to put your energy. So determine of the data you do have, which channels are the most impactful for communication right now. How about really thinking about those touch points with the people and engaging with them? Make them feel a part of your community. There's something I want to make you all aware of, which has to do with retention. Right now, retention is something I think a lot of schools should be focusing on, because recapture rates for lost donors is 4%, meaning all of that effort you put in, all those processes, all that data, all that engagement, if you lose them now, they're likely to stop giving more permanently. These are just some examples of attrition rates, and it's the larger the attrition rate, how years down the line fundraising is impacted by reduced donors. And that really hits the bottom line hard. So this is just a sample of if you have a retention rate of 41% rather than 51%, where those original donor giving behaviors impact, 10, 15 years down the line. So how do you keep people engaged now when they are likely concerned about the economy, likely concerned about what the next few months hold, as you are also just trying to hit your bottom line annual goals? There was some research done on why donors stop giving. This is beyond education space, but into just overall nonprofits. These are the top 8 reasons people stop giving. I have just circled 6 of the 8 that are reasons that can be deterred if you use data to meaningfully engage with your constituents. Here is a list of why donors keep giving. Every single one of these, if you use your data well and work them into your processes of donation, are doable in trying to keep and retain donors. So if you think about your communication with them, sending a simple thank you that's personalized, engaging and mobilizing your volunteer base to help or segmenting your communication to really try and personalize stories so they understand why people, how the money is being used, why the organization values their donation in the first place. The users and donors know what to expect from the interactions. That's all about your communication, and you have the data to do so. So when you're thinking about this next month, as I mentioned, really prioritize the processes and touch points you have. You're going to have to just check off the must-dos versus nice-to-dos for the next few weeks. You have, a marathon sprint going on, and I understand that. To try and use the data to really help you making those decisions of what data you do have, what you don't, and where can you be the most impactful now. And when you do finally have the time in the future, you can review your data health, you can review your processes and how to change and adapt it, and make sure that they're all data-driven and you're using your data effectively. And then lastly is that you can identify the value of your data, what's the value of your data point, and how you want to proceed moving forward. So we've just captured a lot. I've left time for a few minutes of questions, and I appreciate you coming along the journey of my computer crashing on me. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to post in the Q&A section. We had one question come through around really thinking about next year. So if we look past June, how do we think about COVID-19 data and goals for next year? I think there's a lot unknown, and from a data perspective, I think everyone should really be trying to take the time that they do have on hand to enhance the processes, so when things do start to normalize, you can have the data-driven processes in place that you want. You can also do some data health initiatives right now, so you understand in the future when things get back to normal, how you can do some more data gathering, as well as how you can use your data a little bit more effectively. I think from COVID overall, there will be some impact in communication. Events are slowing down, online Zoom hangouts, as well as emails and communication is upticking. You probably want to do a little bit of looking into your contact data, what you have, as well as your segmentation of really trying to do a little look into the different groups of people and constituents you have and what preferences and needs they have at this time. You're going to have some constituents who are really worried about jobs and careers and internships. You're going to have others that might be thinking about, the health of their family and their parents who are higher risk due to COVID. So as you think through how you can use data in a COVID response, really look at that segmentation and personalization, try and put yourself in their shoes and understanding where they are in their life stage, and you can personalize a bit more. Are there other questions? What do you think about making asks at this time of COVID? I think asks are something that every school is having to make. I have seen kind of 3 different approaches from various schools, and it depends on school size, needs, and what options they do have on hand. One was to hold off all asks for a few months and restart their asks this May and June. So they took off any sort of outreach in March and April other than saying thank you and developing that community concept. I've seen schools continue to, have their giving days, have all of their asks, but they change their language. Rather than asking for a dollar value, they focused on participation. So participation is really focusing on just, again, that retention focus. And through participation in that rallying community concept, I've seen some schools be able to reach their goals actually, or exceed them. I do know a lot of schools that are also adjusting their goals down a little bit and are just trying to maintain and push forward. A lot of schools that are dealing with this remote learning are having to work with parents and students who are changing the concept of what, an independent school education looks like at this time. So the concept of giving differs a little bit. And you've also got other people who might be out of a job. So the asks are a lot softer. the focus is on a lot more thank you and community, but it's still something where I'm seeing some schools that are giving a lot easier opt-outs of there's no guilt of saying no. This is the rallying community. So I think it's doable if done right, and you just have to be a little bit softer in your language and really focus on explaining your reasoning. I think there's some honesty that needs to come with it, where you want to focus on, you know, what your school is doing in response, how you're trying to address it in the future, and where the dollar value is going, and why it's more important than ever to continue to give to institutions like yourself. But again, without too much of the pressure to have an opt-out without too much negativity, because you want to establish that long-term relationship. We are reaching 11 o'clock, and if you have any questions, I am here to answer them. If you have want to ask specific questions about process improvement or data for your school in particular, like I said at the beginning of the call, happy to hop on a call with you all, really do more of a deep dive with you. But I appreciate your time, and best of luck with this next month. I know you have a lot on your plate, and wishing you all well and be healthy. Thanks, everyone.